I can still picture the way the kitchen looked that afternoon. The sunlight slipping into the window, soft and golden, almost unaware that something fragile was about to shatter. Coming home early wasn't part of my routine. Normally, I had been across town in a supplier's office, but the meeting was canceled last minute. I decided to use the chance to surprise her, maybe bring lunch, maybe just exist in the same space together for once. We hadn't been clashing, exactly. It was more like a slow drift. We still shared laughter, but never in sync. I blamed it on stress, on the monotony of schedules, on the way love supposedly changes over time. You tell yourself it's natural. That passion just settles into something quieter. That space is just growth. But there had been clues, tiny things I brushed aside. How she would leave the room to answer calls. How her messages arrived locked behind her screen, dressed up as nothing more than work. The way her voice lifted for others but dulled when it came to me. I told myself I wasn't the jealous type. That wasn't who I was, or at least that's what I kept repeating. So when I eased the key into the lock that day, moving as quietly as I could, I wasn't expecting any revelations. I imagined I'd find her scrolling through emails, or maybe dozing on the couch with the dog curled at her feet. Instead, I heard her voice, gentle, tender, unguarded. "I love you," she said. The words weren't borrowed or rehearsed. They carried the weight of truth, and they weren't for me. I froze in the hallway, hidden just around the bend from the kitchen. The takeout bag still in my hands. Thai food, her favorite. A pause followed her confession, as though she were listening, smiling at whatever came back. Then came the sound of a chair scraping and footsteps. She hadn't noticed me slip in. I stepped around the corner, just as she reached for a glass of water. She startled, clutching the counter. "Oh!" she gasped. "You scared me." Her phone lay face down on the counter, screen black. My eyes lingered on it. "Who were you talking to?" I asked. She blinked too quickly. "What?" "Oh, no one. Just my cousin, Trey. We were catching up." Something about it, the way she used his name like armor, didn't sit right. I gave a slow nod, said nothing. She kept filling the silence, stumbling now. He just broke up with his girlfriend. So he was venting. You know how he is. Except I didn't. I'd only met Trey twice, and each time he barely strung 10 words together. "You said, 'I love you,'" I reminded her. She laughed, nervous, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Yeah, I say that to family all the time. That's just how we talk. It's not a big deal." Once upon a time, maybe I would have swallowed that. Not anymore. I set the food on the counter and moved past her into the living room. She didn't follow. I sat, pulled out my phone, and opened our shared plans call log. She didn't know I had access. It was one of those tedious admin chores I handled. I scrolled. There it was. Last incoming call, 12:47 p.m., 8 minutes long. Not saved in her contacts. Just a number. I tapped it. The phone began to ring. She entered the room as it buzzed in my ear. "Wait, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice tight, stretched thin. 1 ring. 2. 3. Then someone picked up. "Hello." A man's voice. Deep, easy. I stayed silent. "Babe," he said, louder this time. "You good? Thought you just called me." I didn't move, didn't breathe, just held the phone to my ear and looked at her. Her face drained of color. She started, but no words followed. The voice on the other end called out again. "Hello." I ended the call. The silence that filled the room was heavier than any argument, louder than any accusation. She sank in the chair across from me, eyes wide as though she were still searching for some way to twist it, to patch it together with practiced lies. But no words came. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just said what was left to say. "Tell me the truth." She opened her mouth. And that's when everything began to unravel. Her lips parted, but the words crawled as if dragging themselves out of some hidden place. "It's not what you think." Of course, it never is. I stayed quiet. Silence has a way of making liars squirm. I'd learned that somewhere between our 5th and 6th year of marriage. The silence dragged on, stretching thin, until it threatened to snap. She rubbed her arms like a chill had crept into the room. "It was a mistake," she said at last. "It's over." But I could still hear her voice from earlier, soft and sure. "I love you." That hadn't sounded like a mistake. That had sounded like something practiced, familiar, worn in. I held her gaze. "Who is he?" She flinched barely. "Someone from work." That answer narrowed nothing. I already suspected it wasn't Trey. That story had collapsed the second I made the call. Still, I needed more, not to punish, not for revenge. I just needed clarity. "His name?" I pressed. Her eyes fell to the floor. "Ryan." I closed my own. I knew Ryan. Tall, worked in her department. I'd shaken his hand at her holiday party. Limp grip, no real eye contact. I remembered the way she had laughed too long at his joke that night. My mind had tucked away at the time, smoothed over by trust. "How long?" I asked. Her mouth pressed tight before she answered. 6 months. Longer than I expected. Long enough for him to know my patterns, to know when I wouldn't be home. Long enough for her to confide things about me I'd never hear from her lips. "You slept with him?" Her head snapped up. "Don't," she hesitated. "Don't ask me that." A pause. Then she released a breath as though something heavy slipped from her chest. "Yes." The pain wasn't in the act itself, not in the sex. It was in the routine of it, in the intimacy hidden inside repetition. Every kiss goodnight she'd given me carried the weight of that lie. "I didn't plan it," she whispered. "It just happened. We connected. I was lonely." That word, lonely, cut deeper than all the rest. Because I hadn't been absent. I hadn't been cruel. I'd been tired, yes, pulled thin by work and responsibility, but I'd been here. I'd been present. And somehow, in the spaces where I thought I was holding us together, someone else had slipped in. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I asked. Her eyes flicked away. "Because I didn't want to hurt you." I let out a sound, half laugh, half cough, bitter. "So instead you let me live a lie?" I was going to end it. I didn't know how. That's the truth about secrets. People don't keep them to protect others. They bury them to protect themselves from guilt, from the consequences, from the reflection in the mirror. She stood and began pacing. I thought it would fade. I thought if I just said I love you to him, it would pass. I didn't know you'd come home. Silence again. Not rage this time, just something inside me hardening into resolve. I rose, walked into the kitchen, and opened the drawer where we kept spare keys, stamps, pens. Buried inside was her old phone, the one she'd abandoned 3 months ago, claiming it had slowed down too much. "Where's the charger for this?" I asked. She froze. "Why?" "Because I want to know everything. Every text, every call. I want the truth, not your edited version." She stepped between me and the drawer. "Don't." That was enough of an answer. I turned, grabbed my keys, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice thin, trembling. "To think," I said, "and to decide whether you get to keep shaping this story." That night, I didn't go to a friend's house or a bar. I checked into a hotel on the edge of town, the kind of place where nobody asks questions and every room looks the same. I sat on the bed, phone in hand, staring again at the number she pretended was Trey's. Ryan's. I dialed, straight to voicemail. I hung up and sent a text. "This is her husband. Call me." 10 minutes later, the phone rang. Same number. I answered. Silence, then a breath. "Did she tell you?" a man's voice asked. "Yes." Pause. Then words that sank into me like stone. "Look, man, at first I didn't know she was married. And when I did, she said it didn't matter. She told me you'd stopped being her husband a long time ago. The blow wasn't sharp, but heavy. Not a knife, more like a hammer. It wasn't truth. It was her version of it, her reality. And that was enough to wound. Because if that's the story she told him, then somewhere along the way in her eyes, I'd stopped existing as her partner. I didn't argue. What would be the point? He kept talking. I didn't mean for it to get this messy. If I'd known from the start, his voice trailed. I let the silence hang. Let him feel it. "You still seeing her?" I asked. No, not for a few weeks. She pulled back, said she needed space. I almost laughed at the word. Space. She carved out an entire double life and then asked him for distance. All right, I said, and ended the call before he could say more. I sat for hours, watching the city lights flicker in hotel windows, cars sliding past, strangers moving through their evenings. I sat between grief and something that felt strangely like relief. That's what nobody mentions. The strange calm that follows truth, no matter how brutal. It gives you ground to stand on again. The next morning, I went home quietly. She was in the kitchen again, barefoot, pouring coffee as if it were any ordinary Thursday. She looked up, startled. You came back. I did. We sat across from each other. She didn't ask questions. She already knew. I slid a folder across the table. No dramatic gestures, just a clean agreement. Separation terms. Fair and simple. I'd had the night to think, and I realized I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. Her hands shook as she flipped through the pages. You're really doing this? I think we already did. Neither of us cried. There were no raised voices. The mourning had already taken place, stretched out over years of distance and unanswered questions. You were a good man, she said quietly. I still am. She nodded. I gathered my keys. She reached out, not for an embrace, just a touch at my wrist, a small reminder of what we once were. I looked at her hand, then at her eyes. I hope you find what you're looking for. My voice carried no bitterness, only truth, because I had to believe the people we once loved, even when they fail us, are more than the sum of their worst mistakes. I walked out without slamming the door. No luggage, no speech. Just my phone, my wallet, and whatever version of myself still remained. It's been months now. Some nights are still heavy. You can't build years of life with someone and not miss the rituals, the quiet moments. But I've learned love isn't always a lifeline. Sometimes it's the anchor holding you down, and sometimes you have to cut it loose to breathe again. I don't hate her. I don't even regret loving her. But I no longer grieve what we could have been. Because finally, after all of it, I have the one thing that was missing all along. Freedom.